again, we're so glad to have you all. We encourage you to also let us know if you have any difficulties with technical difficulties during the course of the presentation. If you let us know in the chat, someone from our team will be able to assist you. And if there are resources that you would like to share with the group throughout the course of the presentation, please feel free to add that to the chat as well. And during the course of the presentation, we will be sharing a link to a brief survey in the chat. That survey is required by our funder. It allows us to continue our work. It has two parts, very brief. And I would like to highlight that at the end of the second part, you'll have access to a certificate of attendance if that's something that you need for being at today's session. So before we get into the session, we have a disclaimer. The views, opinions, and content expressed in the presentation today do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies of the Center for Mental Health Services, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Again, today's session is brought to you by the Southeast Mental Health Technology Transfer Center School Mental Health Initiative. We are located in Atlanta, Georgia at Emory University, and we are proud to serve the 8 states in DHHS Region 4, which you can see on this slide here. Our center includes faculty and staff with expertise in public health programs, finance, policy, and health systems, which provides us with a unique lens through which we can address the mental health priorities in our region. The goal of our center is to accelerate the adoption of evidence-based mental health programs and practices by providing technical assistance to Region 4. And now I'm very happy to introduce our presenters, Dr. Grabby and Barbara Gibson. Dr. Grabby is a board-certified family and psychiatric nurse practitioner and professor emeritus at the Emory University School of Nursing. Her clinical expertise is in primary care and mental health care for homeless and incarcerated women and youth, and most recently providing community resilience model trainings in group settings. Her interests include public mental health, trauma-informed care, the neurobiology of trauma and resilience, social justice, and the social determinants of mental health. Dr. Grabby's published work includes research on the impact of brief community resiliency model training on the well-being of women in substance abuse treatment, as well as 2 randomized control trials of the community resiliency model on well-being, resiliency, burnout, and secondary traumatic stress in frontline healthcare workers. As part of the University of New Mexico ECHO team, she teaches CRIM, which is another way to refer to community resiliency model training, to U.S. mental health workers and to police officers on Indian reservations. But she is particularly dedicated to reaching Georgia's rural and underserved populations with CRIM training. Her team is currently training hundreds of teens while they are incarcerated in Georgia juvenile justice facilities. Barbara Gibson serves as the Housing Services Director with the Women's Resource Center to End Domestic Violence. She has provided leadership and advocacy with a focus on resilience, compassion, and safety since joining the center in 1989. Barbara encourages the embrace of regular nurturing practices to deepen our connection to innate well-being. She believes safer homes and healing communities are possible. And now I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Grabby.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're really thrilled to have you here. And I'm going to go to our slides here. All right. So So we're going to talk about CRIM, or the Community Resiliency Model. And Barbara and I have been working together for some years. I was trained as a teacher when I was in my psychiatric nurse practitioner program. I was doing primary care with unhoused women and children in Atlanta. And their biggest need really was mental health. So I went back to school at a very ripe old age and became a psychiatric nurse practitioner. And although I'm trained in various models, this one won me over because it's so easily taught. And even though this is only an hour and a half class, you're going to walk away with some new skills if you like them. Elaine Miller-Karras developed this model, and it really came out of disaster zone interventions when there was no time to do actually psychotherapy with trauma survivors. But people like Elaine were trained in body-based self-regulation techniques that they used. And there's ample evidence that shows that teaching these simple tools can really help somebody get through very horrible situations. She is at the Trauma Resource Institute, which is where we trained as teachers. And that is a California organization that responds to crises and disasters across the world. We would like to talk about how stress and trauma affect our minds and bodies, which are not separate, of course. Learn about the resiliency zone and how the skills can help you cope with difficult emotions that may cause us to be pushed out of our resilient zone. And then you will be exposed to all 6 of the CRIM skills. You can use them for yourself and use them to help others. I learned this model because I wanted to teach it to the young adults at Covenant House, Georgia. And little did I know how much I would end up using it. And we have no conflicts of interest. There are the 6 skills, so we'll be coming back to these terms. But the fundamental one is tracking. So we do tracking, which is paying attention to body sensations in all of the other skills. We do have a little informational website, and that will go in the chat if you want to get some reinforcement of what we're talking about. And there is this app as well. So I'd go ahead and download it if you want. It's in English, Spanish, and Ukrainian, and it will be in more languages soon. There's also a website if you don't have a smartphone. So think about how we expand our well-being. So if you have ever kept a gratitude journal, that's a cognitive approach. That's working with how we see the world. If we are sort of tuned into our emotions, or if you have a therapist, or if you have good friends that you can talk to, when we talk about our emotions, this is another way that we can feel better if we're down. But there is another doorway, another portal to well-being, and that's through sensations. This approach has been very well established in psychotherapy, but it's really 180 degrees different from cognitive approaches, which dominate in our culture. So it's something that can be integrated with pretty much any approach. So even though it's rather unique, it can be adapted to any group of learners. So I would like to ask you right now just to think for a moment about your definition of resiliency. And if you like, you could put that into the chat. And what people often use the term bouncing back from difficulty, which is well. And, I've heard some military folks who like the idea of bouncing higher or bouncing forward, sort of learning from difficult experiences and coming away stronger. So I would like you to put this in the chat right now. Could you please tell us what uplifts you or brings you strength or helps you get through hard times? If you could put that in the chat, it would just be awesome. Family, prayer, music, coffee, faith, Yes, I would say the first thing we see is faith, my spirituality, and then family. But it could be activities, soothing activities like knitting, I just saw right there, getting exercise, ventilating, uh, make bring I love making other people smile. That's really good. Absolutely, pets, dogs, cats. I haven't seen, but going outside, yeah, very often it's a particular place in nature that brings us, is soothing for us. Yeah, excellent, wonderful. Gardening, yeah, definitely. Sweet. Okay, so, I just want to sort of ahead of time, as you're thinking about some of these things, working in your garden or your family, friends, and so on, do you notice anything happening in your body? And you may or you may not. So we'll come back to that. There is a perspective shift going on right now, or sort of a paradigm change. Um, but I think a lot of people may still think in a kind of conventional way that sort of people are responsible for their own problems. For example, addiction or getting into the justice system. So it tends to be a sort of pathologizing approach, like what's wrong with you? And you may have heard these questions. And then there's been a shift, and that we've come around to what happened to you, sort of more understanding, a trauma-informed awareness that people actually carry a lot of burden on their shoulders, and that people can learn about how such suffering impacts our development. And I'm speaking for everybody here. And then if we move further to the right, this is more of an action step. So based on the assumption that people are resilient and they can learn skills of well-being to cultivate and to reduce their own suffering. So what is strong about you? And you just did a little exercise of identifying something in your life that brings you strength. So this has taken some years. You probably know that the trauma-informed movement came out of the adverse childhood experiences study. So that was over 20 years ago now, but it's taken a while to percolate into the culture. And most people still don't know what it is. So you might say this is a kind of mindfulness, but it's different. I've taught mindfulness and it's wonderful. Lots of good benefits, but this is a sort of focus on the body. We don't need to sort of think about our thoughts or our emotions, merely pay attention to sensations in the body to the extent that it's comfortable. So this approach is totally based on the biology of the nervous system, and it seems to be pretty universal, and for the most part, it's acceptable. Cross-cultural, the children can learn this, and you could do it in your classrooms if your teachers. The oldest person was over 100 when he learned Krim. So it kind of, what you're going to see is that it changes understanding about how we react to stress and trauma in a very compassionate way. And we think that this can reduce stigma about mental health issues and maybe make people more willing to consider getting help when they're really distressed.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Lindy. And thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm so glad to be able to share the model with you. We're going to move now into a key concept of the Community Resiliency Model, which is called the Resilience Zone or the OK Zone. We might also call it the Zone of Well-being. I would encourage you to choose whatever language feels right for you. But essentially what we're talking about is, if you notice the blue lines there, we're talking about your capacity. And then the red line inside there, you notice that it's sort of wavy. There's a release and a charge, an activation and a recovery. So we might think about how, if you're preparing for work, for example, you might notice some activation as you're getting you're acting, you're moving. And then maybe once you get in your car, or once you get to your desk, you're drinking your coffee or your tea or your Coke, you might notice that there's a recovery period. And so we have this kind of ebb and flow that happens for us all throughout the day. And this is sort of how our nervous system works. And as we're learning about the skills, as we're practicing the skills, what we want to be able to do is recognize when we are in the resilient zone. This is where we are mostly okay. We're able to show up and do the activities for ourselves, for our lives. And we're able to, once we practice the skills, recognize when we get bumped out. And we use some of the skills to be able to get back into the zone so that we can be our best selves. We can show up in the way that we can feel good about, and that's aligned with the things that we value. And so what's important to know is that the resilience zone itself is not static. You notice that in this diagram, the blue lines are close together and they're also farther apart. And so sometimes we can have a very narrow zone, maybe if we're not feeling well, if we're very stressed, if we're tired, if we're hungry, our zone might be more narrow. And when the zone is more narrow, we might find that we are more easily bumped out. So you might think about how we love our pets and our children if we have them, our close friends and family very much, but maybe we find that we're more easily irritated with them, or we might be more snappy with them when our zone is narrow. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with us. It just means that this is a function of our biology. And what's hopeful about this model is that we have the capacity to widen our zone. And so as we practice the skills, we'll learn later what fires together, wires together. The brain is always changing. There's this idea of neuroplasticity. So as we learn the skills and as we collect more regularly to our innate well-being, we'll find that the zone widens. We'll find that we practice the skills, we get bumped out and we get back in, so that maybe we are not as frustrated, that we are more even, that we're more okay, we're able to show up and we're able to kind of ride the waves. And what's important about this practice is that it's not that we're trying to get rid of anything. As Lindy talked about at the beginning, we're going to experience stress, we're going to experience anger, we're going to experience sadness. This model really is about helping us relate to the experience in a way that's different so that we can ride what's happening. We can get back to a place where we feel more resilient rather than have fear or aversion, because that's really what causes us the most difficulty, I think, this sense that this unpleasant experience is happening in my body and I don't like it, I don't want it, I don't know what to do about it. And that's where we see some of the behaviors that Lindy was talking about. I'm trying to get rid of this uncomfortable or unpleasant feeling rather than tracking it, recognizing it, and responding to it with one of these well-being skills. So the way that we relate to our distress can be changed for the better when we can begin to recognize it and respond to our nervous system, learn how our nervous system is relating to us in real time, and bring in skills that soothe our nervous system so that we can stay in or get back in our resilient zone or our okay zone. And so here we'll see again the capacity of our nervous system. We'll see again how the nervous system kind of waxes and wanes. We have these ebbs and flows throughout the day. But we also see here that there's a red thunderbolt. And so maybe it's a stressful or traumatic event. Maybe you're about to leave the house, you're rushing, maybe your dog has an accident, or maybe you spill your coffee on your clothes, or maybe you're in traffic and someone cuts you off, right? When that happens, there's this big kind of jolt that happens. You can feel it in your body, right? For me, it feels kind of like actually just like a thunderbolt, just kind of this, crashing into my body, this realization that I'm going to be late. And then I'm noticing, because I'm tracking, that there's edginess, there's irritability. We might also notice mania, anxiety. Again, those angry outbursts. So think about what we're like in traffic. Maybe we think of ourselves as peaceful, kind people, but maybe if we're running late, maybe we're instead, cursing and screaming at people when we're driving in our cars, right? And so that happens when we get pushed beyond our capacity into the high zone. But we can also get pushed into the low zone. So maybe too much has happened for too long. We have exhausted our nervous system. Many of us felt this way as we were moving through the pandemic. And then we notice that there's depression, there's sadness. We feel isolated. Being able to be with other people feels just so hard. Getting out of bed feels really hard. Doing basic things like making the bed feels really hard. There's numbness. And so what we want to emphasize is that it's completely normal. We all get bumped out of our resilience zone, every single one of us. We get bumped on high sometimes, we get bumped on low sometimes, move back and forth sometimes. What we're suggesting is that as we learn to practice the skills and track our nervous systems, we can recognize when we are in the zone, as well as with being able to recognize when we are pushed out on high and recognize when we are pushed out on low. And as we recognize that, we can bring our awareness to what's happening in our bodies, and we can make a choice about how we want to respond. And what we're hoping is that the choice is to respond to bringing a skill. So here's what this might look like. Think about the brake and the accelerator of the nervous system. You remember the activation and the recovery that we talked about with the ebb and flow. So you might think about the activation as the sympathetic drive of our nervous system. It prepares us for action. We're getting ready for work. We're moving. We're preparing to get a report done. We're preparing for a presentation. And so when this happens, when there's this activation, this preparation, we feel it in our body. So the breathing rate increases, blood pressure increases, our digestion and our saliva decrease because the body needs to keep the things that help it best use its energy for action and put the things that are not as essential for action to the side. And then think about the recovery. So the parasympathetic preparation for rest. When the body is in that phase, when the nervous system is in that phase, our breathing rate goes down, our heart rate goes down, and our digestion comes back up, our saliva comes back up. So the digestion comes online. Think about maybe if you're really stressed, how maybe your appetite is kind of off, or maybe you're noticing something happening with your stomach, right? These are normal biological responses. And so when we recognize this, it can help us relate to our experience with more compassion. But we all have this. We have to have this flexibility in our nervous system. And if we think about that line again, it's sort of like, the blue line, the capacity is the road. We want to be able to stay on the road in the lines, because if we get out of those lines, what might happen? We might have a car accident. We might we might find ourselves in a ditch. And we can't just have the accelerator, because what might happen then, right? We're going too fast. We're not able to pay attention, or we're not able to really be with our experience. We might bump into the person in front of us. We're not able to get anything done. We're not moving. If we don't have the brake, if we don't have the brake, if we do have the brake, then if we only have the brake, then we're going to just be stuck on the side of the road, right? We need to be able to have both. We need the accelerator and we need the brake. We need to be able to have that ebb and flow. So this model is really about having some flexibility in our nervous system. We need both. We can't be stuck on high. We can't be stuck on low. We have to be able to move throughout our day so that we are our best selves. So I want to invite everybody now to think about some common reactions to stress and trauma. I'm going to invite you to put some of these reactions in the chat. So if we're really feeling distressed, if we're really feeling overwhelmed, how might that express itself emotionally? If we're having trouble with our thoughts, our irritation, irritability, relationally, behaviorally, what else might we notice? Spiritually, what might we notice? We might be guarded. Irritability is also a big one. We might be quieter or louder, yes. We might isolate ourselves. There's outbursts. We might doubt ourselves. Yeah. And so, as you all are sharing, thank you so much for doing that. What I want you to notice is these are things that even though maybe you haven't typed them, you can recognize them because these are things that have happened to all of us. And that brings up again this whole universality about the ways that we respond when we're experiencing stress and trauma and overwhelmed aggression. Yeah. So again, this does not mean that we're bad, that we're getting anything wrong, but it means that maybe something has happened to us. And recognizing that something has happened to us, how do we want to show up for ourselves? How do we want to respond? And as we're thinking about what's right with us, it gives us a place that we can begin from. There's something good and right about me. My nervous system is trying to help me in this moment. So, how can I help my nervous system so we can be working together in concert? So, uh, you might look at these common reactions to stress and trauma here. And just as Lindy was talking about before, this model has been used around the world. And so these are some things that people have come up with when we ask this question, wherever we've gone throughout the United States and even internationally. So thinking it might be difficult to remember things, our thoughts might be distorted. Spiritually, we might have a sense of hopelessness. With our behavior, we might notice violence or addictions. In terms of relationships, there might be isolation. We might not be able to feel like we can connect with other people. And then emotionally, several of you talked about this rage, fear, depression, grief, guilt, anxiety. That's a big one. So it's really important for us to pay attention to this because it also brings up this whole common human experience. Just like me, other human beings have these experiences. Just like me, human beings have a nervous system. And just like me, we can work with what's happening with our nervous system to bring in some skills to regulate so that we can get back into the resilient zone and relate to the experiences in a different way that helps us stay in there and maintain that flexibility in our nervous system.
And I would just add that the deconstruction of self under the spiritual dimension there, that's huge because when you're outside your zone, you don't feel like you are yourself, especially if you get stuck there. And by the way, if you're stuck in the low zone or the high zone, that's when you need help, need to reach out to friends or maybe for professional help. But with PTSD, I think that's and persons who've had chronic stress, this not feeling like you're your best self, perhaps. And I think through sensations, which are so elemental, they actually underlie emotions. We can sort of shore up our understanding of who we are. It's just like a first step. So we're going to do a little tracking exercise right now. If you would, put your hands together and rub them together as fast as you can. And then open them up and put in the chat what sensations you notice. Heat, tingling, warmth, sweaty, tingling. Yes. Okay. And it changes, doesn't it? Good. Excellent. So you've already done some CRIM. See, it's that easy. So tracking is just reading sensations, localizing them, naming them, attending to them, paying attention to them. So we're already doing this, right? As you sit there, you might get uncomfortable and sort of move around a little bit. You might need to take a sip or go to the bathroom, or we're constantly tracking sensations in our body, but a sort of a subconscious level. So our bodies are all set up to do this. And usually we only attend to negative sensations like, a blister on your foot or feeling out of breath, to sort of mind it and sit down and get your breath back, right? But with CRIM, we're saying sort of check into your body if it's comfortable and notice, is that sensation pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? Now, many sensations are just going to be neutral, right? I don't know if you had any pleasant sensations when you rubbed your hands. Hopefully they weren't unpleasant. They may have been neutral. And then if they are either pleasant or neutral, we would invite you to kind of lean into them a little bit, linger with them for around 10 to 15 seconds, because this is what it takes to cause some of the neurocircuitry to change, to shore up your resiliency. It seems to have that effect. We've done many research projects, including 2 randomized controlled trials that show that there's an impact on well-being. There's an association with well-being and reduced stress. So, and then sort of notice also what, if you localize it and then name it. If you name it, you can tame it. So as Barbara said, you learn to sort of notice the difference between sensations of distress and well-being. And if you do that, you've got a little bit of power there. You have a chance to make a choice about what to pay attention to on the inside. This is a wonderful piece of research from Finland. Over 4,000 people in 100 countries put their responses to prompts that were like video clips or text or images, photos, which elicited these emotions across the top. And then they drew on a computer where they felt energy in their body. So earlier, when you identified something that brought you strength, like your pets or your faith, you may have noticed a warm sensation in your chest. So with happiness, we have this yellow and red are energy or activation. This is a whole body experience when we're happy, when we feel love very intensely, and pride. But look, with anger, we have activation as well. Fight and flight, show up here on these body maps. So it's, and I find it very interesting when I'm feeling sort of anxious. I'm in the habit now of localizing it, and I believe it gives me a little more control. Black represents no change, and blue is loss of energy, loss of activation. So you can see with sadness and depression, the limbs are leaden, and in fact, so hard to get anything done when we're depressed. This class is really an invitation. When you're happy or feeling proud, sort of zero in on where does that land in your body, and what's it like? Is it warm, light, open? Start using some of this sensation vocabulary. Here it is. These are just some examples, but you can make up words. Children are amazing. They make up words. So these are standard words, but earlier you were talking about tingling, which is a kind of vibration. We can certainly notice our heart rate and breathing rate. So these are the 5 senses, but then muscles, do they feel tight or loose or heavy? So start expanding your sensation vocabulary. We didn't learn this in school, but there's a whole school system in North Carolina that's learning it right now, 140,000 kids at Wake County. So the fact is that what we pay attention to grows. As I said, we have a negativity bias in our brains for survival, granted, and that's so important. But if we can start paying attention to the pleasant or neutral sensations, we are expanding our resilience zone. And we can use these techniques to rebalance our nervous system, get back into the zone when we are pushed out. It's just like having a garden. Well, you know what? If you water the weeds, they're going to grow. But if you water the vegetables and the flowers, they're going to really grow. So we wish you that you can try this out. However, we do have a caveat. And that is that for many people, it might be really hard to notice sensations in the body. When I first taught this to my husband, he said, "Are you crazy? What are you talking about?" So, um, so, and certainly with a history of trauma, it could be unpleasant to notice sensations in the body. So, CRIM is always a choice. And if this is distressing, you can simply stop and try another skill that is easier for you. I do believe that starting with external sensations through the five senses can work for anybody. In other words, you feel the sun on your cheek, just notice that for 10 seconds and see, notice how it affects you in your body to pay attention.
All right, thanks. So the next skill is resourcing. So we had a little bit of practice with using sensory vocabulary, sensory language, but one really good way to do that is through identifying a resource. And so just taking a look at this picture, I want to encourage you to name what you think might be pleasant for the people here. And you can go ahead and put it in the chat. I can start by saying that, they're smiling, so that must be pleasant. They're having food, yes. It looks like they might be having some sort of beverage, so maybe that's nice. They're laughing together. They have a sense of community, food, companionship. Yeah, and so all these things are imagining, bringing up pleasant or neutral sensations for the people that are there, and imagining that maybe the sun feels warm, the sense of belonging, social fulfillment, relationship. Also brings a sense of warmth, maybe in their chests, maybe their muscles feel loose. That sense of acceptance as well, and we all need that, the sense of belonging and connection and acceptance. So just imagining, thinking about the heat map, the diagram, how these experiences might be landing in their bodies. Yeah, we can go to the next one. So when we think about a resource, we think about anything that brings us a sense of peace or calm or joy. And it can be a person. Many of you named family, a place. Maybe you feel like to go someplace special when you do hiking, a memory, a part of yourself. Maybe think of yourself as a person who's kind, or maybe you're a good runner. Maybe you love that you're a good reader, a gardener, a knitter, crocheter. And as you think about your resources, you might notice in your body a sense of calm or a pleasant sensation. You might feel peaceful, strong, or resilient. And your resource can be real, it can be imagined. So maybe you might think about a wonderful vacation spot. Maybe you've not been there, but even just conjuring it up in your mind can bring up pleasant sensations in your body. And it can be internal or external. And these are some good examples here, the photos there. So what we want you all to know too is that resources can have many natures. And so a really small example for me is that during the pandemic, the place where I used to love to practice yoga closed. And that was a really lovely resource for me. And so thinking about that, maybe I might feel a little bit of sadness, that sense of loss. So discussion of a resource can sometimes shift out of pleasant sensations and into difficult memories and or uncomfortable body sensations. So I could just recognize, I'm really sad that my yoga studio closed. And then as I'm doing that, I might think about the more pleasant aspects of the yoga studio. So the community that I met there. And now there's another studio that's not too far from there. And some of the same teachers work there, and some of the same students that I practice there. So with the person, you might ask them, what did you love most about your aunt, or what might this person say to you now? And if it's too painful to be with the resource, then you can certainly switch to another one. But we want you all to be mindful that resources can shift. And that doesn't mean that we can't work with them. We can acknowledge the sadness and then pay attention to the more pleasant aspects of the resource if it feels right to do so. So now we're going to have a chance to do a little demo. Here are some instructions about.
So, Barbara, I was in a workshop. I learned something cool. Would you
Yeah,
be willing to try it out?
absolutely. I'd love to.
Could you tell me about something that brings you a sense of calm, peace, joy, or comfort, safety? And so it could be a person or a place, um, an activity, something about yourself.
Absolutely. Even just thinking about it, preparing to say my morning coffee ritual, I noticed myself taking a deep breath. It's my favorite resource.
Okay, so tell us just a little bit about what's so wonderful about that morning coffee.
Yes. So when I'm having my morning coffee routine, I have several mugs that are all gifts that have been given to me, including one from you, Lindy. You gave me a mug from Emory many years ago. And so I choose a mug and I remember who gave it to me. I prepare my coffee. The house is quiet then. And the smell of the coffee as it's dripping. And then as I drink the coffee, the warmth of the mug, the smoothness of it, the weight of it. I love the coffee with not cream. I love coffee mate. I know it's not the healthiest, but I do love coffee mate and vanilla syrup. And then the place where I drink my coffee, I also love gardening, so I can see the garden as I'm having that quiet time with myself in the morning. It's very lovely.
So you have the coffee in the mug and you like the warmth of it. And the mugs were gifts
Yes,
from friends, and you can even sit down and see your garden um,
yes.
as you drink it. So I wonder if you could tell us what's going on inside your body right now as you talk about this experience.
Yeah, I'm noticing warmth in my chest. I'm noticing that my shoulders have softened, that I'm breathing more slowly, that my voice has slowed. It's very pleasant.
Nice. So I would invite you to just sort of sit with those pleasant sensations for about 10 seconds here. And then I would invite you, if you notice you're getting to the edge of your resilience zone, or if you've been kicked right out, either on high or low, would you bring this to mind and just see what happens?
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you. As we are learning about the community resiliency model, we're all going to be CRIM guides. And so as guides, we are people who share the wellness skills. And so Lindy just gave an example of guiding me to think about a resource. And as she was doing that, she didn't interpret or assume anything. She kind of stayed one step behind, asked me open-ended questions so that the experience could unfold in my body. And as I'm tracking it, I'm discovering for myself what sensations are coming up and how am I experiencing those sensations. So are they pleasant? Are they unpleasant? Are they neutral? And guides are non-judgmental. So you are with the person as they are paying attention or really reading their own nervous system. You are providing support for them to do that, but you're not naming the experience. You're making it possible for them to do that for themselves because we're the experts in our own bodies. So we're learning how to pay attention to what our bodies are telling us, what our bodies are telling us. So think about what it could be like conversationally if you're working with someone maybe at work or in your personal life is having a difficult time. Maybe they're having a crisis. This happens for me often as a person who works with survivors of domestic violence. So a question I might ask is, can you tell me the moment you knew you had survived or when help arrived? Because the nervous system sometimes needs some time to catch up. And so you might still think you're in that period of fight or flight. And so these questions can kind of remind you in this moment, I am safe, or at that moment, I became safe. So I'm not there right now. And you can even notice what that feels like in the body. If there's a loss, you might think about, what might this person say to you? What kinds of things did you like to do together? And if it's a questionable resource, particularly if you're working with young people, and maybe they offer you a resource for, they notoriously say something about substances, right? And so you might ask them to develop that resource. And if you're using the substance, who are you with? Where are you? So rather than breaking the rapport that you're building with the person, developing the resource can help you maybe switch the focus, and you can focus on the people that they were with or the place they were with, so that you don't break the connection, but you can still give them the opportunity to be with the resource. But certainly we don't want to encourage substance misuse in young people.
Yeah, and I can give you an example of a boy who is in the juvenile justice system, and his resource was smoking weed. And then we said, well, yeah, but do you remember a particular time? He said he didn't have another one, but he did remember a time that he went with some friends through the woods on a path to a little pond where they sat on the rock. So that the place, as Barbara said, we made the place the resource instead of the substance. So this is absolutely a biologic model. And we have a gross interpretation of a three-part brain model, but it's really, really helpful. And very often I give this image to young people because it helps all of us understand ourselves a little bit better. So here in the survival brain, this is the brain stem. So this governs our metabolism and nutrition and sleep. Very, very basic, but it's also responsible for fight and flight. So this is a part of the brain we can't change our responses. You saw what the autonomic nervous system does, the sympathetic, the parasympathetic. They're like the accelerator and the brakes, and we can't change those things. The only thing we can change a little bit is our breathing, right? The limbic system is a little higher, and this is where emotions are. And then finally, the top part is the cortex, or the thinking brain. So this, of course, is not developed until around age 25, sometimes in young people. Good to know. But what we need is to have our brain in sync. And we need synchrony of all three parts of the brain. But if you're outside the zone, either stuck on high or temporarily even, or on low, this means that the lower two parts of the brain are in charge. And we don't have access to this override of which gives us better judgment to not to punch somebody, knock their teeth out, or self-harm, in fact. So we need techniques to bring the three parts of the brain together, which means automatically the brain and the body are in sync as well. So CRIM is something that, because we are aware of sensations, these parts of the brain don't have language. They only respond to sensation. So threat and fear and so on. The next slide is I don't think I got the sound on, so I'm going to do this myself. But it's Dr. Dan Siegel. He is a child psychiatrist, and he has a 2-minute hand-brain model, which we're going to do right now, and the link will be in the chat so that you can watch this, because it's only 2 minutes long. So I want you to point to the base of your wrist, and that's going to be your brain stem, the survival brain. Your arm is sort of like your spinal cord coming up. Cross the thumb over your palm, that's the limbic system with the amygdala at the tip. This is like the smoke detector, the warning alarm for the body, from the body. And then put your fingers over, and that's your cortex. So you have this nifty little hand-brain model, and you can teach this to kids as young as 5 years old. So what happens when we're under threat? We have incoming data related to fear and threat. And this is going to allow the our self-defense mechanisms to come in. So that's our two parts of the lower parts of our brain, our downstairs brain. And what happens? Bingo, you flip your lid. So your cortex goes offline. You don't have access to it in the moment. So what are we going to do? Are you going to use a CRIM skill and bring it back online so that the brain is back in a synchronized state?
Lindy, I wanted to quickly add, I heard a good expression that, and you may were going to say this about how you can talk about it with kids when the dog is barking, when the alarm has sound, the wise owl flies away, and it's really hard to learn this. So when the dog is barking, the wise owl flies away.
Cool. Okay, so how can you start practicing CRIM? We'll just pay a little more attention to the five senses. You can have a mindful meal as you eat. Pay attention to texture, color, smells, tastes, and so on. Notice if the texture changes when some food is in your mouth. So this is a really different way of eating, and it's a very sort of respectful, almost like saying grace, to notice our food more thoroughly. And then we can notice sensations in the body. Again, a lightness, shivering, hunger, fatigue, pain. If you're tired, where are you? Where do you notice that in your body? So you're kind of opening a new portal, a different dementia. But when you use body awareness, and CRIM is not the only model, it is the only model that really has a pretty comprehensive way of looking at our mental health, plus giving you skills. But any type of body awareness, you are making a difference in your brain, especially if you're paying attention to pleasant or unpleasant, or pleasant or pleasant or neutral sensations. But this will enhance emotion regulation, we believe, and also social interaction and empathy for self and others. These are all connected, and they have to do with what's called the insula in the brain, which is part of the cortex, this outer brain, but it's buried way down here, right? It gets messages from the body and transmit them to the higher brain portions. So when we're exercising body awareness, it's like beefing up your muscles for all of these things, including your sense of self. So this is very, very exciting. And we believe that CRIM can really have a huge impact because it's so user-friendly, I think. And what do we know about stress and trauma? Believe it or not, there's good stress. That's when we're sort of geared up because of a test or an evaluation or a report. And we do have a mild stress response, but we recover very quickly. Tolerable stress means that it's a time limited. And we also have some sort of buffer. So we have either people we can reach out to, or we have techniques ourselves to get us back into our zone. So for example, exercising may help with that. But toxic stress, and unfortunately, most of us have experienced ACEs in our lifetimes. And I'll get to that in a minute. But this is the prolonged stress activation with no protection. And so there's definitely an impact. And the CDC has done work over the last 20 years that is very, very exciting. So ACEs are adverse childhood events, not just abuse and neglect, but also events in the family like mental illness, untreated, substance abuse, domestic violence, incarceration, and divorce. We know that about 70%, actually over 82% of the population, if you add in community violence as well as an ACE, then 82% of us here in this audience and speaking have had childhood traumatic events. And 15% of us have had 4 or more ACEs. So this has an impact on how we mature. And it is connected to our health throughout our lifetimes. So there's the website, and it has been connected not just to mental health issues, but also to chronic disease. So cancer, heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, okay? So the more we can learn about ACEs, the more we can have some control and embark on positive things to counteract ACEs. So we know that ACEs can be counteracted. This is research done at Johns Hopkins. And it's simple things like, well, not so simple things like having an adult who thought you were special, and somebody who protected you and the family. And then also this body-based wellness skills can also help with healing. These are called positive experiences of childhood. The Johns Hopkins research. So talking about feelings in the family. I wish I'd done that when my kids were little, but they had a bunch of these things. Okay, but again here, you may be one of the 2 non-parental adults who showed an interest in a child that made a difference in that child's life.
All right, so the next skill is grounding. And grounding is really just noticing where our body is in contact with another surface. So right now, I'm imagining that most of us are seated. So our bottom is in contact with the chair. Likely we have our feet on the floor. And when we're grounded, we have a sense of self in relationship to the present time and space. We're not worried about the past or the future. And so this is important for me, particularly as a person who is working to manage anxiety, right? So if I'm noticing anxiety and I'm not caring for it, it can feel like I'm flying away from my body. But as I'm tracking, as I'm recognizing that, practicing grounding, I can feel myself in my body at this time. I am here. And grounding frees us to think clearly and control our emotions. Yeah, Deborah says I love grounding. And we can do it in many positions. So we can walk and pay attention to our steps. I like being able to be really intentional. So noticing my footfall as it starts with my ankle and kind of rolls through to the bottom of my foot and my toes, and walking slowly and just floating on a surface, maybe through a part of your hand. So maybe if you are in a meeting and it feels kind of overwhelming, maybe just placing your hand on the desk or placing your hand on your clothing and noticing the texture of the fabric. Again, sitting on a chair or even standing up against a wall, maybe just placing your hands there and noticing that sense of support that you get when you're in contact with the wall. And so it's really important to offer this caution. For some people, grounding is just uncomfortable. And we remember that as guides, we're letting the person be in charge of their experience. And if they're noticing something that's uncomfortable or unpleasant, we let people know that they can stop at any time. This is all invitational. So for some people, it can increase reminders to a time maybe when it was traumatic for them. And so they can shift to something that's more comfortable if that's the case. And again, they can stop at any time. And that's important for us too, as people who are learning to read our nervous systems and respond moment to moment to what's happening. If we're noticing something that's uncomfortable or unpleasant, we can stop and we can do something different at any time. Next, we have gesturing and spontaneous movements. And I'm guessing that many of you do this all the time. Maybe you're not aware of it, but it's a movement of the body or limbs that expresses a thought or a feeling. And you may have noticed me several times place my hand here. This is a gesture that I use. It's nice because I can feel the warmth and the support of my own hand. And it feels like a calming gesture. And as I do it, it reminds me that I'm supportively available to myself. But maybe you might do something else like twirl your ring or twirl your hair or maybe touch your ear or bounce your leg. These are gestures that maybe feel soothing to your nervous system, but they don't cause self-injury or self-harm. And as we do them, maybe you are accustomed to doing them. What we want to invite you to do is to bring in tracking. So as you practice your self-calming gesture, what do you notice happening on the inside of your body? As you twirl your hair, what do you notice? So we're going to have an opportunity now to practice a gesturing exercise. I'm just going to invite you all to maybe think for a moment about what your self-calming gesture is. And on the count of 3, I'm going to invite you to bring that gesture in, whatever it is. And then just notice what happens in your body. So 1, 2, 3. And pay particular attention to any sensations that are coming up that are associated with your well-being. Those sensations that are pleasant or neutral. And let's just do one more. I invite you now to think about a gesture of joy, right? So what might that look like? So on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. Oh, I love that gesture, Kelly. Yes. Yeah. And again, take a moment to notice what that feels like in your body. I notice that Kelly's smiling, right? And so is that pleasant? Right. So just notice. And if you think about the gesture of joy, where does your body tell you? How does your body tell you that joy is present? How does your body tell you that a sense of calm is present? We're learning to think of our body as an ally as we develop or deepen the relationship to our bodies, and we learn to read the language of sensation. We can be more comfortable at noticing in the moment what's happening, staying with those sensations that are associated with our well-being, and also bringing in a skill if we're noticing sensations that are associated with our distress. Because again, we have choice about what we pay attention to. We don't have to be trapped by the storms of our nervous systems. And finally, help now. We call these the EpiPen, the emergency skills of our nervous system. We can use them when we feel really stuck in the high zone or really stuck in the low zone. We might think about this as help now or reset now. And these are ways to quickly get ourselves back into the resilient zone if we're moved out. So here we might not be able to say, hey, so tell me about a resource, because maybe the person is so upset they can't even do that. But we might say, hey, can you take a walk with me? Or would you like to drink some water? Or can you look around and count some colors in the room? Or can you press against the wall? So here are some examples about things that we can practice if we feel really bumped outside of our zone on high, or really bumped outside of our zone on low. We might even practice counting, noticing the temperature, noticing our surroundings. These are the things that, again, bring up sensation, because remember, when we are in the fight or flight or in knocked out on low, the body wants to pay attention to the distress. It wants to know that we're safe. And so being able to say something like calm down, it's not really going to help us. The body's not going to calm down until the felt sense of safety is in the body. So the sensation of calm. So that as I drink my water, I notice the weight of the bottle. I notice, as I drink it, the cool water going down my throat. I'm paying attention to those sensations. And I can notice that I am calming down. And so as a guide, you might invite someone, hey, I noticed that you're upset or that you seem sad. I know something that might help you. Would you like to take a walk with me? And remember, I use invitational language because, again, it's always a choice. So these are just some suggestions here, but this list is not at all exhaustive. There might be things that you are already doing that are really helpful for you. For me, breathing deeply is a good help now skill for me. But as CRIM guides, we don't prescribe breath, because for some people, taking a deep breath can feel very triggering. It can feel very activating. But if that's something that you do and you notice in your own body that it helps you, even though it's not on this list, then do that and practice tracking along with it. So these are some things that you might try, but if there are other things that you're already doing, do those and notice what happens as you do them.
And when we were in our training, I can remember we were practicing using help now in pairs, and a lot of response could be something like, if you say, "Oh, I see you're upset. Would you be willing to walk down the hall and count your steps? What are you, crazy?" So you could get rejected, but it was sweet because this person just kept hanging in there, trying different things to see what would work. I want to say something about pushing up against the wall. You could do that with your hands and push as hard as you can. You're using the big muscles in your arms and legs. And it actually does cause a little reset of your nervous system. So you could push up against the wall with somebody. Now, since I work with so many kids and women who are incarcerated, pushing up against the wall with your hands might feel super vulnerable. In that case, they can use one hand or their back and get some of the same effect. So when you download the iChill app, you'll see that there's a help now in the corner right up at the top in case you need it. The pushing up against the wall is really helpful. Shift and stay, we kind of already told you about this in a way, because when Barbara told us all about what it was like to drink her coffee with her, no, it wasn't milk. Let's see.
Coffee mate.
Coffee mate. Okay.
I love coffee mate.
So I asked her to hang in there, stay with the sensation of well-being or strength for about 12 seconds. Okay, sit with it. So that was the way that she had an impact on her nervous system long-term, perhaps. Okay, but when the shifting part of it is all about noticing sensations of distress, or be it emotional or thoughts or sensations, but then trying to use one of the CRIM skills to get back into your zone or stay in your zone. So it could be a resource, it could be grounding, it could be any one of the skills. And I have had a patient who told me she used CRIM when she had a migraine. And she said, I focused on my feet. And I said, oh, okay, so your feet felt pleasant or neutral? And she said, no, they hurt. They hurt too. And she has diabetic neuropathy, but she said it didn't hurt as bad as my head. And it gave her some relief, at least temporarily. We hope that you will take on the role of CRIM guide and maybe teach this to somebody else. It's really important that you yourself learn how to notice sensations so that you can teach them to others. So it's all about putting your own oxygen mask on before you help other people. We know that actually many reactions to stress and trauma can't be talked away through a cognitive approach, but they might be sensed away possibly. So when people learn that it's biology, not mental weakness, a lot of their reactions, they do feel a sense of relief and a sense of greater well-being. Barbara and I taught a group of women in drug treatment, 35 women, and they had never heard of ACEs before. And they had never seen anything like the resiliency zone. And they felt a sense of understanding themselves better. Now I know why I do what I do. And they were actually able to use the skills when they felt drug craving. This was some early research that we did with Emory nurses. They were had a great response to the intervention. We didn't know if it would show anything. They got 3 hours, but since then we've researched a 1 hour virtual CRIM class, and it had almost identical results. So what were these nurses doing? This is what they actually did. Resourcing and tracking on my way home, noticing smells and sensations, concentrating on the fabric of my scrubs. And they actually did it during these very bad clinical situations. And the impact was that they identified was that they were able to get their energy back or maintain their professional posture. So when we are outside our zone, we tend to get into negative thinking. We can disconnect from people. If we can use a CRIM skill or some of the other skills that you use already, you can move into a resilient place. And it's only when we're in the resilient zone that we can respond to the needs of other people. Self-care comes first, really. Here's some history. There, as I said earlier, there seems to be a reduced incidence of PTSD and disaster survivors with chronic trauma. This first study was with survivors of the Tutsi genocide, which is decades ago, but those survivors still had PTSD and they had significantly improved mental health. So here you are the Community Resiliency Model guide, and you can share these skills if you choose to. So this is the way we hope to have trickle down so that we have more resilient communities. And the Trauma Resource Institute link is here. You can also give the iChill app to anybody you want. I like this graphic of the 2 hands because basically we have this cool self-care mechanism that we carry around right here inside of our own bodies. This is another important slide that describes the difference the giving tree, but it's a really marvelous depiction of inequality and then equality, where it unfortunately doesn't consider the individual needs of people. And then when you do, it's equity, but it's only justice if we get to the place where the apples are on both sides of the tree for each person. Really, this is where we need systemic change and cultural change actually as well. But CRIM, the reason we think that CRIM is sort of goes beyond equity to justice is that it's for anybody and it can be shared with anybody. There's the app. And if you don't have a smartphone, you can go to ichillapp.com and hear Elaine's voice. This is the research, which you're welcome to look at your leisure. And there are references. So we're going to stop slides. You're welcome to take my email there. I'm at Emory, and communicate with me. And I would be glad to share a set of about 10 slides that have the resilient zone and the body maps and some of the other key. So, if you want to take this small slide set and show people you work with, I'd be glad to get that to you if you would like to email me. But we have time for questions right now.
And I put my email in the chat as well.
Yeah, I think that I've always called it grounding. And when Barbara explained about touching like the surface of your desk or something, noticing sensations, I notice when my husband is not behaving himself very well that I touch my arm and I notice sensations and it calms me. So what happens is if I do a CRIM skill, I'm going to bring my heart rate and my blood pressure down automatically. And he's going to sense it actually, which will bring his down. So right now there's a big study in Atlanta of it was an NIH grant to the Atlanta Birth Center where a lot of the staff got trained as teachers and they're teaching it to moms, pregnant women, high-risk pregnant women, and mothers and babies.
Dr. Grabby, there is a question in the chat asking, oh, yep, Barbara just answered, asking about if the situation with your husband is related to mirror neurons, and Barbara says yes.
Right.
There
And in
is.
fact, when Barbara told us about this very pleasant experience that she has in the morning, we were kind of there with her. And so it's shared. So you could create a resource by writing it down, but if you share it with somebody who really listens to you and validates you, then there's that social interaction piece that makes it so much more powerful. So I think we do this when we're with friends. We share experiences, we really listen to each other and validate each other. But with friends, you don't say, well, what do you notice happening in your body right now as you are telling me about your vacation? But you can, and they can learn to start sort of developing these CRIM skills.
Mm-hmm. And Donna had a question about the help now skills. So I'm not sure if she's still here, but I'll just say quickly that we talked briefly about some things that we might be able to do, rescue skills that can help us get back into the resilient zone if we get bumped out. And so these are things, for example, drinking a glass of water or noticing the temperature in the environment or noticing, what's around me, what sounds do I hear? I mean, these are ways of reminding the nervous system that I'm okay in this moment, helping me calm down. And then once I calm down, then I might be able to bring in another skill. So I might be able to bring in a resource, or I might be able to practice shift and stay. What we're really trying to do is get to a person, likely when their lid has flipped and maybe they don't have a lot of language in that moment because they've been pushed so far outside of their zone. They're in a heightened state. And when they're in that state, it's probably not the best time to ask a person, oh, so tell me about something that brings you a sense of peace or calm or joy. But we might say, hey, would you like to take a walk with me? And then one of the things that I do here is I don't necessarily ask the person immediately what they're noticing. What I do is talk about what I notice. We have a really lovely hall here. So as we walk along the hall, I talk about how it really helps me to walk slowly and how we have a lot of plants and flowers here. So I talk about how beautiful they are. I talk about what it feels like to feel the sun coming in the window. And again, those mirror neurons, as I'm settling and as I'm modeling kind of what it feels like to pay attention to sensations, then they have that same experience. And those skills are not exhausted too. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. And, when you do CRIM, you're putting yourself into that parasympathetic state, that parasympathetic recovery part of your resilient zone. You can widen your zone by doing yoga and Tai Chi and, eating, sleeping, exercising, all those wonderful things are going to widen your zone. But I believe that CRIM puts you there faster than ordinary mindfulness does. It's like you're in the HOV lane. It's like you're getting the high octane mindfulness in a way. There is a certification to be a teacher and the Trauma Resource Institute website has information. There's lots of free resources there. The training, you can get scholarship sometime, but it really belongs in schools as much as possible. And right now we're working with the Georgia juvenile justice system, and I see somebody from there on this call. But we are teaching as many kids as possible in their classrooms. And so on any given day, there are 800 to 900 12 to 18-year-olds in the detention centers in Georgia. So we do virtual classes teaching exactly this content. And we are also doing some in person as we speak. Somebody's doing it out in Augusta, Georgia at the Regional Youth Development Center. They call it Youth Detention Center or Youth Development Campus. And they're pretty receptive. A couple of things that are, well, 3 things that are offshoots of that I'm so excited about. I have to ask the parents for their permission to do for the kids to do a survey. They answer me immediately. And I've got a YouTube playlist for them so they can learn the skills too, so that it's a common language. We were getting some feedback from the kids on their post-tests that they were teaching it to their siblings and to their parents. So that, it gives families a language, a way of talking about emotions, really, that can be very supportive. The other thing is we're going to develop a comic book for the kids. Kids who are incarcerated can't have anything with staples. So we're coming up with really creative alternatives. And then last of all, we are going to start a program for the youth to get a certificate as a peer youth ambassador. So we have the full support of the Trauma Resource Institute in California because we did the initial randomized control trials. We've been gung-ho trying to get this model to as many people as possible for a long time. So they're going to support us as we try to get the kids who are incarcerated trained as peer teachers. And I'd be glad to communicate with anybody who wants more information. I think you're all doing really wonderful work, and thank you for coming, and thank you for participating. And Kelly, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all so much. A lot of this has been in the chat, but I'll just share last few resources with you all. You've seen the link for our survey. And, oh, it's going to make me flip all the way through here. We just wanted to make sure you know that at the Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, we have a resource catalog. So we invite you to check that out. That has all of our resources in it. You'll see a picture in just a minute. All right. Right here. So we'd love for you to check this out if you're interested in getting more resources from us. We've done some question and answer. There'll be links in this slide deck that'll be sent to you where you can sign up for our listserv, follow us on social media, etc. And again, there is a certificate of attendance available after you fill out the evaluation. And so I will stay on the line until 1:30 in case folks have any questions about the evaluation, but I am going to stop recording now.